Welcome everyone to yet another SDN Community Voices, this time on Tuesday for a special episode. This is our weekly touch point between you, the members and followers of the Service Design Network, and the voices around our community. My name is Felipe, and as always, I am your ambassador and host. And today I'm very excited to have Marc Fonteijn here with us. He's going to talk a little bit about his work on the Service Design Show, on the Service Design Jobs. And the title was Transparency by Design, because I really think that his work really brings transparency generally to our service design community. And before we dive in, a quick reminder to drop any of the questions that you have in our chat, because we're going to address them later on during our final Q&A segment. So also interact with us throughout the process. But now let's bring Marc to the stage and just, hey, Marc, thank you for coming.
Hey, Felipe. Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
And I'll ask you to quickly introduce yourself for anyone that might not know who you are.
Sure. My name is Marc Fonteijn. I live in the Netherlands with my wife, 2 kids, 2 cats, and a hamster. I've been running a podcast and a YouTube channel called The Service Design Show for close to a decade right now. I have some other adventures as well as running a platform called Service Design Jobs, where you can find, I would say, the most up-to-date overview of service design positions across the globe. And for the last 4 years, I've been running a community for in-house service design professionals called The Circle.
Yeah, a lot of projects going on for sure. And I
For sure.
recall that a couple of weeks ago, I was actually watching our 200 episode for the Service Design Show. So quite a lot of things happening this past almost decade, and with all these projects coming up.
Yep. Yeah. No, just keep doing the same thing over and over again for 2 weeks, every 2 weeks for 10 years. Then you get to 200 episodes plus.
Yeah, exactly. It starts adding up, right?
At some point it starts adding up. Yeah.
And maybe to start off, what was your thoughts when you started the Service Design Show? What was the first thing that made it start, you know?
I would say a few things. When I started the Service Design Show, I was still running a service design agency in the Netherlands, and I was one of the reasons I thought that it would be interesting to interview people around service design is that I always had interesting conversations with people at conferences. Usually, when the presentations were over, during lunch, during dinner. But going to conferences is quite a hassle, and it's quite expensive, takes a lot of time. So I was thinking, like, can I find a way to sort of get to a similar place without having to travel to conferences? And I was like, you know what? Why not just do a podcast and see if people would be up for it? So it was partially my own curiosity and be able to pick the brains of some of the smartest people in our industry.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, podcast was quite a kind of new format also, right? So how was that per se to really dive? I think also for service design, nowadays we have quite a lot of podcasts. We have this the Service Design Yap there in the UK for service design and stuff, but I think probably was one of the first ones in that sense. So was it scary to start a service design podcast with the podcast format being new, service design also not having so much
It's
of that?
interesting. Yeah. Well, if you look at the history and the hype cycle of podcasts, podcasts had a previous enlightenment era. I think it was around, like, the podcast started around 2015-ish. Everybody was starting a podcast back then as well. And then it sort of faded away and then it came back. What made it easier for me is that it initially started as a YouTube channel. So I didn't plan to do it as a podcast. And in my studio days, we already had quite a lot of experience doing interviews, working with video. So going to YouTube was quite a natural move for me. And then somebody told me, like, you know what? Why not just put the audio as well on a podcast? And that's the podcast, like, came a month later. But it actually started as a YouTube channel only.
Yeah, and I think it just creates this format where it's more accessible sometimes. I think a lot of people like to watch videos, but also there's very much a lot of people that just prefers listening to a podcast.
For sure. And right now, if I look at the numbers, the actually the audio version only gets a multitude of the YouTube views. So most people listen to the audio, obviously.
Yeah, it ends up bringing more accessibility, I think, for different
It's easier
contexts.
when you're on your bicycle, when you're doing the dishes, when you're walking your dog, right?
Yeah, exactly. And how has it been to find so many guests throughout the year? Was it a lot of your own outreaching, or was it some people who came after a while interested in joining? How was it to find the people to join?
It's amazing. Like it's an ongoing journey. I would say half of the guests are just people that I want to talk with.
Mhm.
I've read a book and I think, you
Yeah,
know
it brings
what,
back
this
the
author.
curiosity you're talking about, right? Being
Yeah,
curious
yeah,
about.
yeah. So half of the guests are people who I just found interesting and thought I wanna pick your brain, and the other half are just recommendations, mostly from former guests, sometimes just from the community. Um, but my network is quite, there is a limit to how many people I know, and it's
Yeah.
really hard to reach outside of your own bubble. So I'd really rely on the people around me to tell me, Mark, you really need to talk to person XYZ.
Yeah, and I think it's very important also to be able to reach outside of your bubble, because I think also for service design we learn so much from other people's cultures, perspectives, different experiences in other continents, other places, right? So uh, what came a little bit from that?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's really hard to get out of your own bubble if you don't get any help.
Yeah, exactly. And was there at any point that you really thought, oh, that's a very different perspective from what I have? Was there a first time for that when with any of the guests?
I would say many times. Many times. I can recall one moment. It was a few years ago when we were talking about AI, and I remember a conversation where, like, this is 2 or 3 years maybe ago. So the idea about responsible AI was already getting louder. But in that conversation, somebody told me, like, listen, Mark, what is the point at which we can say that not using AI is the unresponsible thing? Because we, as
Mhm.
for instance, researchers, have our own biases, mostly known and explored. So if we are analyzing an interview, we are doing that through our specific lens. At some point, you might say, okay, and AI is also biased, but that bias might be more predictable, might be the bias that we want. So at which point does it become irresponsible not to use AI? And I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to frame it. Um, and that's just one example. And there have been many, many more. I'm still getting surprised most of the episodes.
Yeah, hopefully. I think always we're going to have different perspectives. They're always going to probably shatter a little bit our own, and then we learn from that, right? So I think that hopefully is happening every episode for you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And in which point of the journey did the service design jobs come to play?
Ooh, I think it was about 5 years ago now, and I have to thank my good friend Daniela Catalanato for that. Um, he actually started publishing an overview of service design jobs on LinkedIn
Mm,
before I did, and this was he started publishing this as a Notion page, and the idea of a service design job board lived with me already for a very long time. I think I registered the domain maybe 10 years ago, maybe even longer. So this was always one of those projects where you're like, okay, when I get the time, I will start this job board. And when I saw Daniela posting these jobs, I was like, okay, man, let's see if we need to, if we can collaborate. So I reached out to Daniela and we set up the website, and it's still running. And Daniela has moved on to a lot of other initiatives and projects. And we've made the website so that it's mostly self-sustaining at the moment.
mhm. Yeah, and I think it's great because personally, as a service designer, I just also graduated, I'm looking for jobs right now. I struggle so much sometimes with LinkedIn, the way the search works.
Yep.
You try to
Yep.
search service design, and then it brings me an engineering job that I don't have any competence for.
Hmm.
So it's a lot of times great just to have this place where, okay, I can see what are the companies that have service design positions, or the places that are hiring the most and everything. So this archive, personally for me, is just a thank you also for
Yeah.
the
No.
you're doing there.
Thanks. It would be if everybody who is watching or listening to this episode, if you see jobs, you can actually submit them to us. It's
Mm,
free. There is a paid option, but you can submit any job, service design job, to the platform. So go to servicedesignjobs.com, and then you'll see a link that says post a job, and let us know, because we are crowdsourcing this. If you are a
mhm,
company, like, just let us know what your open positions are.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's a great thing to kind of bring the community to help also, because a lot of times, as you're saying, you might know about the jobs around your bubble, but then somebody else's bubble has some jobs and you don't know about, maybe in South America, Australia, other
Exactly.
countries that are
Yeah,
not
exactly.
so close to us.
Yeah. No, and we've got a lot of plans what we can do with the platform now that we've collected over 5,000 jobs.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's work in progress.
Fair. And one other thing that is there at the service design jobs, also the salary report, right? I believe you just finished a couple of weeks ago with the 2025 gathering the information. What can you say a little bit more about that?
Oh, yeah. So the salary report, also, we're celebrating the fifth edition, which is quite a feat. Every year, over 1,000 service design professionals participate and share their data. All I can say is thank you if you've put in the time. And the salary report initially really started as, okay, how much can you earn as a service designer? Are you being paid fairly? And year over year, based on the feedback that we've been getting, we've been tweaking the questions, adding questions. um, I'm not entirely sure that if I would start it today, I would call it a salary report. Salaries
Mhm.
are an important part of the data that we have, but there's so much more in it. So I call it the salary plus report nowadays. The 2025 version isn't online yet. You can still access the data from 2024. So if you really need to know something, you can access last year's data. But yeah, no, we are working hard to get the 2025 version ready as well.
Yeah, I imagine it's a massive work just compiling all of that data together. And you also have so very nice visualizations there for you to see and interact with the data.
The thing that makes it somewhat complex and I think more valuable than a lot of the other reports that you see is most other reports present you with a PDF
Mhm.
where the data has been curated by somebody through a lens. And our belief from day one was you are in a much better position to know which question you want to have answered. So, are you interested in service design salaries within the fast moving consumer goods in Brazil?
Mhm.
Like, is that the lens that you want to apply to the data, or do you want to know if there's a gender pay gap in Italy? So we've made the report in a way where you can actually go into the data and select and filter and combine things rather than giving you a static PDF. And that's one of the things that makes it uh, a little bit more work on our end, but I think it's absolutely worth it.
No, 100%. And also, there's a combination of the qualitative and quantitative data. So not only you know the absolute prices or numbers of people, how much they're earning their salary, but how how much they're actually happy in their job. What is the reason they're in that job? The different areas they're working on. So it really brings, I think, that filtering to really the nitty gritty information you
And
might
there's
want.
even like, yeah, and thank you for saying that. And it gets me excited to share even more because there's like it's a gold mine. It's a gold mine of data, and I think we can do the service design industry a big service by sharing more of it.
Yeah. And how do you see it in other maybe design industries close to us? Do you feel that maybe they have a better sharing culture in that sense, or how is like the transparency of other design things that maybe we can learn from, or maybe they can learn also from this work you're doing with service design jobs and salary reports and things like that?
I don't know. It's hard for me to compare. I don't have a really good overview of what's happening in UX or design ops. I know that design ops assembly publishes a yearly report. I don't know. I feel that every year so far, over 1,000 people have shared their personal data to the service design salary report, which is amazing. Like,
Mhm.
um, I don't know if there's more or less of a sharing culture, but I think we should cherish what we have. And I'm already satisfied. And if next year 10,000 people would participate, that would be even better because we have more reliable data. But like, let's not underestimate where we are already today.
Yeah, I think it starts adding up also in the same way that you're talking about the podcast, that
Yep.
year by year, little by little, people start bringing more people, and then we start getting more data.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you think that the community that you have, so like your newest project, came naturally a little bit from there, or how did that come to be?
Yeah. So we're talking in this case about the community for in-house service design leaders and people who want to be a leader. It's called the Circle. You mentioned that this is a new project. It has been going on for almost 4 years already. So it's still
Newer.
new. Yeah, newer, most recent. Uh, the Circle emerged from a very service design oriented approach. So in my position, I get to talk to a lot of people, and I also get to talk to a lot of people who work in house. And at some point, I noticed a pattern where everybody was saying, you know what, I work at this big company as a service design professional, but it's really hard for me to connect to other people in a similar situation.
Mm,
And when you heard that once or twice or three times, you're like, well, okay. But at some point, I think I had 20 people sharing the same thing with me. So I was like, if you all want to meet and you're currently not meeting and the existing communities, channels aren't serving you, maybe it's an unmet need from a service design perspective. It's a pain point. And we can do something about it. So let's set up a prototype, and that's how we started. Like, we set up a prototype to see if we can bring in-house service design professionals together, and the prototype is ongoing and it's growing. And I would say every year, every week, every month, it's getting better.
mm. Yeah, and I think that goes back a little bit with what you're saying also on the beginning of the podcast, that you were going to a lot of conferences and having interesting conversations. But right now we have such a more digital focused world, and sometimes having those interesting conversations not as easy or as accessible in this very post-pandemic digital kind of situation where a lot of people are working from home. Maybe they're not even meeting colleagues on the day-to-day basis. So
Mhm.
communities end up creating maybe a space to do those connections, right?
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
And how do you think they tie all together a little bit, like the service design jobs, the circle, the service design show? Do you think they kind of create this conversation in between them, or do you see them more as silos on themselves?
I think silos is a big word. I think the interconnection could be even stronger. I think
Mm,
that's a better way to phrase it. Um, the connection between the service design show interviews, the podcast, and the circle community is, I think, stronger because in the community, I get a very strong sense of what's going on. What are the topics that are relevant to practitioners? And that inspires me to find guests on the show who have an opinion, a thought, something to say about that topic. And the other way around as well. I sometimes bring in some of the guests into our community and to have that conversation. So there's much more of an overlap there. with service design jobs, like one thing I would hope is um, about half of the jobs that we post on the website are for in-house positions. So you could either be working at a consultancy or agency, or you could be in-house. I would love to see more companies saying, okay, we're going to hire a service designer, but we're also going to give him the mentoring and coaching and the support of a community, something
Mm.
like the circle. That could be much more than it is right now. So another project to be worked on.
Yeah, another domain to be bought beforehand.
Yeah, exactly.
The maybe
That
the
in the
the
best scenario. Yeah, yeah,
Well, I think that's great. I think communities build communities, right? So if you give somebody a brick, then they start building the wall. The next person comes, and then after a while, you actually construct the house. So it's great to hear that that has been working so far for the past almost decade of your projects.
yeah. No, work in progress. Work in progress.
Yeah, I think going back to the episode I was mentioning, your 200 episode, you said that one of the main learnings you had that everything is a prototype, right? So
Everything.
you are
Yes.
always implementing, always making it better throughout the process. So do you have any things that you could share from like future work in progress ideas you're working on right now?
Yes. A few. So, of course, we are also exploring how AI could play a role in community design. And one of the things that we are working on right now is we have like imagine having a lot of conversations with very smart people, very experienced service design professionals, uh, having those conversations documented, recorded.
Mhm.
At some point you get to a volume of conversations where it becomes really hard to find something that you want. um, in our case, we are already starting to use AI to find meaning inside our conversation. So we have, I think, close to 100 recordings. And right now, we have an agent, a circle agent, who you can ask, okay, what are some of the best practices that have been shared around stakeholder management in the last 100 sessions? And this isn't just generic knowledge, right? That
Mhm.
a large language model gets from, I don't know, its training data. This is knowledge that is extracted and shared by uh, people who are doing service design. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that I'm really excited about, and it actually works. It's really cool to see it work. Um, Another thing that we're exploring is our community does not have a Slack channel, and this is something that I've been reiterating for the last 4 years. I don't see us going to Slack anytime soon. We focus on slower, deliberate, intentional communication, and we
Mm.
are sort of trying to see, okay, how can we get people to communicate more and better
Mm.
in between the events that we do. So
Mm.
not just more, because that's often the focus. Let's increase our engagement, but that's not enough. We want to have more and better and higher quality connections, conversations, relationships. So that's one of the things that we're also working on.
I think that's great. And also at this point, I'll also open to the rest of the community that's listening to us today. If you have any questions for Mark for any of his projects, drop them down below and we're going to answer you live. Um, and then to that, I think while we're getting questions, I think it's quite interesting the use of AI. I think AI becomes a buzzword a little bit all over the place nowadays, but AI really works well on summarizing a very big bulk of information. So in that case, as you're saying, you're building up this community with a lot of videos, a lot of information, and then as one person, maybe it's not the easiest to go through the whole thing, and you really want to know one information for your work or for a project, and it really, that's when it breaches a little bit to help you find that.
For sure. Yeah, no, AI is absolutely a buzzword, and it's interesting and it's funny to play around with it. And I think as service design professionals, we need to play around with it because it is a very useful, it can be a very useful tool to deliver better services. And this is how I'm seeing it. It's just another way, another tool in the toolbox to deliver a better service. I see community as a service towards its members. And I'm always looking like, okay, how can we deliver a better service? What do our members need? And AI in this case unlocks some opportunities that we haven't been able to unlock before. And it's just fun to play around with it, like get like know the limitations and the opportunities.
Yeah, I think you can learn from its biases, as you're saying, really understanding where they are, and I think it ends up being also self-reflection of our own limitations and biases and how we can
Yeah.
work with that. And then we got a question from Adam slash statement. Big fan of your podcast, of course. How do you connect with so many interesting people?
Thanks, Adam. First of all, good to hear that there are fans out there of the podcast. How do I connect with so many interesting people? I guess I'm just very lucky to have interesting people connect me with more interesting people. I think this is what happens when you surround yourself with interesting people. They know a lot of interesting people, so it's almost like a snowball. You speak to somebody who is very passionate about what they do, who's very driven, who's very knowledgeable, and the chances are pretty high that they'll know somebody else who's in that same domain. So I stand on the shoulders of giants, Adam.
Yeah, you start jumping little by little on the different branches of the tree, and those are growing from with other people.
Yeah, for sure.
And I lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry, but
That would happen when Adam asks a question. Yeah.
no. It was great to have a question. Is that I was thinking about another question to continue, and then I lost it. But I would just go with you were talking about AI as one of the things that was very interesting in the circle, right? Uh,
Yes.
and what about using that in order to be able to go through the service design show also?
Yeah. It's that's exactly the same concept. Regardless, like not regardless, but the concept is the same where you input data and then you have a conversation with it. So you could, what we are building is you're able to have a conversation with an archive. And
Hmm.
in this, it could very easily be the archive of our Service Design Show podcast, right? And you go to the Service Design Show agent slash bot, and you ask, what have we discussed on the Service Design Show about journey management? And then it gives you an overview and tells you which episodes it were. So exactly the same concept, not yet implemented for the Service Design Show, but just as easily done.
Yeah, I think as you're saying, the AI is really kind of interchangeable in that sense. It's just creating the database so it can fetch
Yep,
it from.
for sure. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And I think we're coming almost to the end now of our time together. Do you have any extra message you would like to say to this big community of service designers about the projects, about interacting with you or with any of the projects?
Um, if you want to reach out to me, best is on LinkedIn. You can find me, Marc Fonteijn. And I see one more question came in, so I'm happy to answer that. But if we don't have time for that, I would really encourage everybody who's watching and listening, find your community. Their research has been done, and it's very clear that if you're standing in front of a mountain and you have a friend standing next to you, the challenge of climbing the mountain is looks smaller just by having a friend standing next to you. So find your community. Don't go at it alone. That will be my message.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we do have a little second to answer the last question
Sure.
here from Pamela. I don't know if it's going to come on the screen because it's a big one, but I'll read it out. I am joining this podcast for the first time, so happy to know about the circle and the community. As previously discussed, the confusion always happens when you say you are a service
Mhm.
designer. People confuse it with technical implementation of service design using technology. how do you explain what service design is in order to differentiate it from the technical service design implementation?
Thank you for the question, Pamela. I think this is a question that will never go away. How do you explain service design? Um, there is an interesting story about a coffee shop which helps to explain service design. There are many videos on the Service Design Show channel on how to explain service design. The short answer is it depends on who's standing in front of you. So,
Mm,
what do they know? What is their context? And connect to that. Because I'll give you, I've written an article and I think it's called The Definitive Way to Explain What Service Design Is. And one of the key areas there is if you are trying to explain what salt is, you might say, if you're standing in front of a chemist, that it's a combination of a metal and a non-metal. But if you're standing in front of a chef, then it's an ingredient to add flavor to your meal. And I think the same goes for service design. Um, it depends on who is standing in front of you and what they know and which conversation you need to be having. So don't focus on what you want to say about service design. Focus on what the other person is interested in and connect it to their world.
yeah, that sounds great. To that, that's now the end of our time. So thank you very much for Pamela or everybody else that joined us and ask any questions to Mark. Also, feel free to ask any other questions there. We can also see them and talk about them on LinkedIn later on. And thank you, Mark, for coming and talking a little bit about your story, your projects, and all your great effort doing for the service design community.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite, Philippe, and I hope people enjoy this.
Thank you. And to everybody that joined us online, thank you very much for being part of it. And a big thank you for engaging live here with us. Stay connected with us in our socials for any updates in future SDN Community Voices episodes. And I hope to see you actually on Thursday. We're going to have us again our ritualistic service design episode with Roundtable. So stay tuned for that for some more information in a couple of minutes this afternoon. So see you all soon, and thank you very much for joining. Bye.